Hello everyone, this is Rig, a channel on History Extended. In this channel, I will be bringing forward different topics of Indian history. Hope you like it. So today our topic is Schools of Indian Historiography. Throughout ages, there have been different schools of ideological thought who have interpreted Indian history according to their own concepts and theories. So one by one, we will go through all of them. In introduction, we need to know how is history written. Now, writing history, the process of writing history is called historiography. Interpretation of Indian past is the main motive of Indian historiography. Now, in Indian historiography, throughout ages, we have seen that different historians or different schools of thought have interpreted history according to the needs of that time. India has a very complex history. By the meaning of complex history, we get to know that there is diverse culture, there are diverse regional demographics, and also there is diversity in economy. The rise and fall of empires played an important role in the formation of Indian history. Now, unlike today, India was not a homogeneous country back then. So, in different portions of India, there were different kinds of empires who stayed for a fixed amount of time. Confluence of diverse culture. As we know, India can be defined as unity in diversity. So it is very natural that there was confluence of different diverse culture throughout the subcontinent. Interplay of various religious and social forces played an important role in the formation of Indian history. India is a country of spiritual thought. Hence, religious and social forces must have played a significant role in influencing the history of our country. Now, what are the main schools of Indian historiography? First, as I said, there are diverse schools of thought. These schools of thought were based on the ideological needs of the time and each had their own different contributions. It was a product of scholarly endeavors. Throughout ages, different educated scholars have played a very important role in bringing out and interpreting the history from the different facts ranges from ancient Indian texts to the works of modern historians. Unlike many other scholars, I differ to believe that Indian history only started during the colonial period. No, it did not. It had started long before. Yes, it was not in the form of proper history as such, but it had started long before. We will go through each one of them. Intellectual traditions and social context of respective eras also played an important role. Society always influences history. We will go through them. Each school is unique in their own contribution. Now, in each school, you may have a thought that you may disagree, you may not agree to some aspects, or you may also support certain thoughts of certain schools. But that doesn't mean that there was no contribution of any school or a school did not play any important role in Indian history. Each had their own contribution. Now, the first school is traditional or indigenous school. When did it start? It refers to the school that refers ancient and medieval text as their sources. Now, in ancient text, we have religious and mythological narratives. Okay, so as I said, India did not have any historical writing as such, but we had all the texts like Vedas, Puranas, Upanishads, epics, Ramayana, and Mahabharata, they imparted moral and ethical lessons. Now, even though they were not history, we can interpret history from them. Blends with legends, folklore, and divine intervention. Now, legends means famous stories, and folklore means stories which have spread throughout generations as a folk culture. And divine intervention mainly means how God played a significant role in the formation of our culture. Vedas are religious texts which began from around 1500 to 500 BC. It contains hymns, rituals, and philosophical discussions. Now, as I said, it is not pure history. So, it contains hymns relating to the customs of different schools of gods, different rituals in order to praise certain gods, and philosophical discussions. Now, what was their contribution? They give important information about the social organizations, religious practices, and cultural milieu of the Vedic period. So, during the Vedic period, we come to know what was the culture going on, what were the customs going on, how the people used to behave, how they used to treat their elders, what was the social structure, was there any caste system or not. All these things we come to know from these texts. Puranas give genealogies of kings, important dynasties, and major events. Cosmology, mythology, and legends associated with Hindu gods and goddesses were also very important. Now, you may ask the question that legends of Hindus, gods, and goddesses are not history. Yes, they are not. Very true. But while discussing about the culture that played in during that time, a discussion about Hindu gods and goddesses are very important. From the life story of the gods, from the legends associated with the gods, we come to know about what kind of behavior was there in the society. Now, the Vishnu Purana, Shiva Purana, Bhagavata Purana are particularly very relevant historical text, because even though they are not pure history, they provided important genealogies of different dynasties. Ramayana and Mahabharata are blends of mythology, history, and philosophy. So, as we know, we all have read Ramayana and Mahabharata. These are not pure history, but they are blends of mythology and history. You will have to extract the historical aspect of Ramayana and Mahabharata in order to know about the culture that played during that kind of period. They depict social order, welfare, and familial connections. Now, social order means what kind of laws was there, what kind of behavior each caste used to do, what was their jobs, how they used to conduct their jobs. Warfare means what was the military status of a state, and familial connection means the kinship, the relationship between different families. How was the social structure of a relationship between elders and younger ones? Now, it helped to preserve Indian culture and helped to shape a collective memory. Now, Ramayana and Mahabharata have been going on for thousands of years. So, throughout all this text, we have come to know about Indian culture. There is an aspect of Indians who believe Ramayana and Mahabharata to be the original Indian cultures and also go according to it, provided a sense of identity, morality, and continuity to Indian civilization. People like to identify themselves as the creators of the as the creation of Lord Ram. We call many ideological differences are there, but there is a section of society who used to believe that we are from the Ram Rajya. So that is how there is a sense of identity, morality means the ethics that has been displayed in those epics, and all this contribute to the continuity of Indian civilization in general. They provided a foundation for further exploration and interpretation of India's past. So we all know from Ramayana that there was a relationship between India and Sri Lanka. So thus, if we go deep into archaeology and involve different other aspects of India, different other aspects of historical research, then we get to know about that a real connection existed between India and Sri Lanka. So that is how it provides a basis for further exploration of India's past. Now, criticisms of traditional school. This school was not perfect at all. The first criticism is it was not exact history. It was a text of divine intervention. Okay, as I have said. Now, challenging to separate facts from fiction. We all know that there are highly eulogized versions of ancient Indian texts. which is not scientifically possible and which did not happen at all in practical sense. But still we need to read it, and it is very difficult to separate those stories from the actual ones. It focuses on the ruling elite and dynastic history only. Now, in Ramayana and Mahabharata, if you see, we don't get to know a lot about the culture of the common people during that time. We come to know about how the royal families used to behave with each other, what kind of matrimonial relationships they had, how they fought wars, their heroic tales, everything. But we don't get to know about the history of the common people. Historical events may have been exaggerated, modified, or embellished to suit the moral teachings. Now, to suit the moral teachings of a particular period, if there was a certain problem in a particular period, to address that problem, people used to increase a story into the epics. Okay, they used to include a story into the epics, and so it had been modified throughout generations. None of it is true. Now, the next thing is medieval school of Indian historiography. Now, what is medieval school? It spanned from 8th to 18th century CE in the Indian subcontinent. It had a chronicle based approach, unlike the past indigenous school where it had a divine based approach. So the political history, dynastic genealogies, and achievements of rulers were most important during this time period. Raj Tarangini by Kalhana was an important text. It contained the genealogies of kings of Kashmir from the ancient times to the 12th century. Raj Tarangini is considered to be the first historical text in the Indian subcontinent. Now, Tabakat-i-Nashiri by Minhaj-i-Siraz is another important text during the period of Delhi Sultanate in 13th century CE. It portrayed the political history of sultans, how their administration used to function, and what kind of warfare used to happen. Tariq-i-Firoz Shahi by Ziauddin Barani in 14th century was another important text of medieval historiography. It contained the reign of Firoz Shah Tughlaq of the Delhi Sultanate. There was a shift towards more secular and factual approach to historiography. Unlike the Vedic text, the Puranas or Upanishads, this text contained a more factual approach. Even though the historians almost never wrote anything bad about their rulers, because they were funded by the rulers themselves. Even though every ruler was considered to be like an incarnation of God, but still it was highly factual. Everything was not true, but most of it can be true if one with expert knowledge of historiography researches from this text, they can extract or interpret the real history from it. It contained detailed descriptions of battles, administrative policies, how the taxes used to function, and what kind of cultural practices used to prevail during that time. Documented their contributions to art, architecture, and governance. Now, criticisms of medieval school. Medieval school was not at all perfect. They were biased and glorified rulers. As I have said, the rulers themselves funded court historians to write about them. So obviously, the historian, in order to keep their job, will not be writing anything wrong about the rulers. Neglected the experiences of common people and marginalized communities. Just like any other text on celebrities, the medieval historical text also based their history on the rulers only. So common people, we don't get to know anything about them. Often composed long after the events they were described. So they relied on oral traditions and earlier historical accounts. So in order, if you write something that happened in the past, you will have to rely on oral traditions that is being continued. Now oral traditions can be made up. Okay, lot of oral traditions can be made up according to the orator. So there is not exact historical facts in it. Now, Orientalist School. This school is like the first important proper historical school, even though it had a lot of faults in it, but the sole intention of this school was to bring out Indian history. Let's go in detail. The term Orientalist refers to Western scholars who specialized in the study of East, including India. So the Western scholars, the Britishers during colonial period, when they came to India, they found it as important to dominate over the Indian society in order to extract resources from them. In order to do that, they needed to portray the fact that Indians are very poor, very backward, and nowhere in comparison to Western culture. So, the administrative officials decided to dig into Indian history and point out mainly the bad things from it. European colonial scholars' interest in studying and understanding history, languages, and religions and cultures. They documented Indian history using a rigorous empirical approach. They did not at all take into account the spirituality and the philosophies of India. They just took out a certain facts and interpreted history based on Western parameters. This was mainly done to serve the interest of British colonial administration, that is, to dominate over India. The History of India by Mountstuart Elphinstone was an important text of the Orientalist period. It contained comprehensive account of Indian history covering various dynasties, political events and social customs. The History of British India by James Mill. This is very famous text. It portrayed Indian society as static, backward, and portrayed the Europeans as a lot superior to India. Now this text had numerous volumes, and James Mill wrote all these volumes by never coming to India. So you can understand how much of a correct history it will be. It received mixed reactions from Indians. One section of Indians who were the Indian elites, they found it as a text to pamper the Britishers in order to get favors. It played a crucial role in collecting, translating, and preserving of Indian text. Now, this is a very important thing. Many European historians during this time, they translated Indian texts like Ramayana, Mahabharata, so that the whole world could read them. And also, there was a deciphering of script. Like there were many scripts like Brahmi, Kharosthi, which could not be read. So a man named James Prinsep in the 1830s, he deciphered both Brahmi and Kharosthi. So this was an important aspect, and from Brahmi, by reading from Brahmi and Kharosthi, we come to know about ancient history like the Mauryan period. It incorporated archaeology, linguistics, and anthropology. Now, ASI was founded, Asiatic Society was founded by the Britishers during this time, who also laid the basis of history as a multidisciplinary subject, including archaeology, linguistics, and anthropology. Now, criticisms of Orientalist school. They neglected indigenous perspectives. They did not take into account the views of Indians in general. Eurocentric bias. They had to project Western ideals into Indian civilization. They projected themselves as a lot superior to us. Reliance on European frameworks and biases. Now, if you want to interpret Indian history, you will have to do it on Indian parameters. Now they judged the Indian history based on Western parameters, which was very wrong. Misinterpreting of Indian text and traditions. They did not go into depth of the Indian religion, and they took only the empirical facts, and they gave a judgment on Indian society which was very wrong. That was, it is backward. Administrative need for dominance was the main intention of the Orientalist school. So now let's go to the next school, which came as a reaction. No, before going to the nationalist school, we'll have to know about the another school, that is the Evangelical School. This was mainly a Christian school of Indian historiography. It was closely associated with the Christian missionaries. Now, why this happened? There was a Christian need for conversion. The Catholic Church wanted to come to India and convert all Indians into Christian. So to do that, they had to portray Indian society as a lot more backward than the Christian society. Hence, there was a Christian centric perspective, emphasis on conversion. The main motive of the school was to portray Indian history in such a manner that Indian people believe that all of our gods are false, all of our religions are false, and we should convert into Christians. The assessment of indigenous religions were made. Like faults in every religion were given focus on social reforms was done. This was, you can say, one of the good things about Evangelical School. They released campaigns against sati and other female infanticide kind of ill habits that was there in our society. There was reliance on missionary accounts. The different missionary came to India and they wrote something about Indian society. They went to Europe and European historians took all those writings in order to make a history of India. Christianity in India, an historical narrative by James Hogg. So this was an important Evangelical School text. A History of Christianity in India by Stephen Neal. This was also another important text. Now, criticisms of Evangelical School. It had bias and selective interpretation, as we can understand. It focused on the importance of Christianity in India only. There was cultural imperialism, means imperialism means to dominate over, to conquer. So the Christian culture wanted to conquer over the native Indian culture. So that was the main intention. Neglect of indigenous perspectives. Like any other European historians, this school of historiography also neglected any indigenous perspectives. Ethnocentrism and stereotyping. They made a general view of Indian society by taking a few bad aspects only. Specific religious agenda. This school always had a specific religious agenda, that is to convert people and cultural imperialism into Christianity. Now our next school is a reaction of all this school. The Nationalist School came as a reaction of the Orientalist School. It provided a platform to the Indian nationalists for projecting the indigenous views about Indian historiography. It emerged during late 19th and 20th century. Sought to challenge the colonial narrative. Now we all know what the colonial narrative was. The colonial narrative means Indian state is very backward and only the Britishers can help in reforming the Indian society. There was rediscovery of Indian heritage. India had a long history of thousands of years, which was a lot older than the Britishers. So by going through all those historical facts, we gained a sense of self-confidence. Emphasis on national unity. The Indian historians like Ramesh Chandra Majumdar, all these people, Bipin Chandra, they projected a sense of unity so that all the people come forward as united and fight against the British imperialism. Highlighting the Indian agency. It highlighted the need for having a voice of India. The role of Indian leaders, reformers, and social movements in shaping the course of Indian history. So, all the Indian reformers relied on the text by the nationalist historians in order to motivate people to fight against the Britishers. R.C. Majumdar, History and Culture of Indian People, is one of the very important texts of Nationalist School of Historiography. Satish Chandra, Medieval India from Sultanate to Mughals, gives a compilation of the Islamic period in Indian history. Bipin Chandra, India's struggle for independence, gives a compilation of how the different freedom fighters struggled to bring freedom for our country in 1947. Tara Chand, The History of the Freedom Movement of India. It had 4 volumes. It covered the details of every aspects of protest and freedom struggle in India against the Britishers. A.R. Desai, Social Background of Indian Nationalism, also portrayed similar views, which is very important. V.D. Savarkar, The First War of Indian Independence. This text mainly gives in detail the facts of the revolt of 1857. Savarkar was one of the first people to call the revolt of 1857 as the first war of Indian independence. Now, what did it do? What are the contributing factors of the nationalist school? It promoted a sense of pride in their heritage. Indian people were very underconfident until then. The Britishers made us understand very well that our culture is backward, our country is backward, and we only thing that can give us a sense of relief is their culture. So it provided a sense of pride in our own heritage. There was reconstruction of Indian history, inspiring cultural renaissance. So there was a rebirth. There was a rebirth to bring out the ancient and medieval Indian culture to the forefront of the Indian people. Encouraged Indians to explore and celebrate their rich heritage. We must feel proud on our own culture, the culture that has existed for thousands of years. So there was a mood of celebration in the nation for our own culture. Now, criticisms of nationalist school. This school, even though it was very useful during the freedom struggle against the Britishers, even though it was very useful, this was not free of faults. So let us go through them one by one. It had selective narratives. Just like the Britishers ignored all the good aspects of Indian history, the nationalists ignored all the bad aspects of Indian history. Idealized version of Indian history. In some cases, they promoted a good thing in Indian history in such a manner that it became the perspective of an entire nation. So that was not true. It focused on the elite historical figures and grand narratives. It focused on the great kings like Ashoka, Samudragupta, all these people, and rejected the common people in total. It neglected the subaltern voices. Subaltern voices means voices of the people who are diminished, voices of the people who do not play and a significant, even though they play a significant role, they are not given enough emphasis. It is the voice of the downtrodden. Subaltern voices means voices of the downtrodden, marginalized communities. Political instrumentalization. So all their views was taken into politics for the fact that they had to protest against the Britishers. So the next thing is Marxist school of historiography. Now Marxist school was one of the most important school in Indian historiography, since a lot of researches happened during that period, and their researches was based on the economic output of a country. Now it applies Marxist principles and methodology in order to understand Indian history. It emerged during the mid 20th century. Lens of class struggle and economic factors. So the Marxists viewed Indian history, they view history in general as a history of class struggle, how the lower class people fought against the upper class and got rights, how the lower class people fought against the upper class and established their status in the society, how they provided for the economy. All these things are the principles of Marxist historiography. Emphasizes the role of material conditions, social relations, and economic systems. They did not only focus on the rulers. They established their focus on material conditions, what was the living conditions of the people, how they maintained social relations with different status of people, what was the medium of interactions between different classes of people, and what kind of economy used to function. Historical materialism. Now, this is one of the basis of Marxist historiography. It means material conditions of production, class relations, and economic systems as the driving forces of history. Now, history, people cannot live without proper economy. So, Marxist people used to focus on economical factors only. Class struggle, conflicts and tensions between different social classes was taken into account in order to understand Indian historiography. Now, structural analysis of the society of India was done on different historical periods. Colonialism and imperialism was studied. What was the economic output of colonialism and imperialism? All these things were studied. The drain theory, how the Britishers exploited the Indian resources for their own gains. All these things were studied in the modern historical period in order to establish the fact that Britishers basically looted us. R.S. Sharma, Indian Feudalism, in his text Indian Feudalism, he focused on the view of how there was a feudalistic system, how there was different class system in Indian society. Irfan Habib focused on the agrarian system of Mughal India, how the agricultural economy used to function during Mughal India in order to provide a subsistence for the people and also help in other economic factors. D.N. Jha gave the text The Myth of Holy Cow. It focused on the relationship of the negative aspects of religion into the Indian society. It for all of this text focused on economic factors. This was the Marxist historians were very rigorous critiques of colonialism. As I have said, they established the drain theory and they established the fact that the Britishers looted India. Now, their criticisms. Uh, as a criticism to Marxist historiography, we can say that they reduce the huge content of Indian philosophy, spirituality, culture, customs into a single aspect of economic only. Economy is not only the only aspect of historiography. Only economy never runs a state. So the Marxists reduced the whole Indian culture into economic output parameters only. They neglected the non-class factors. They focused too much on the class struggle as the basis of the driving force in Indian history. They had ideological bias. They firmly rejected all the religions, all the social cultures that prevailed in the Indian history and which helped in formation of the structure of historiography. They had selective approach. uh, they rejected religion completely. They had political inclination. Now Marxist, there is also different aspects of Marxist politics. So the history came into politics and they they took the facts of history which influenced their political standings. They downplayed the Indian contributions. They judged the Indian society on the basis of economy only. And so, if the economy was not great in some period, they totally rejected that period as a contributing factor to the Indian society. Subaltern School of Historiography. Now, subaltern means the downtrodden, people who are not given enough importance. So, the Subaltern School of Historiography emerged in 1980s and 1990s as a critical response to Marx's mainstream historiography. Now, the mainstream historiography focused on the elite class or the ruling class only. The subaltern historiography decided to shift their focus into the history of the downtrodden people, focused on subaltern groups including peasants and tribal communities, the Dalits, formerly known as untouchables, and women. So all these groups, as all these subaltern groups, they were not given any importance before. Now with the coming of subaltern historiography, they came into limelight. Multidisciplinary approach into historiography was taken. Anthropology, sociology, post-colonial history and cultural studies was done in order to understand the historiography of India. Studying non-elite sources like oral histories, folklore and songs played an important role in the popular culture, as was the view of the subaltern historians. Now, Ranajit Guha is considered to be the founding person in the subaltern historiography of India. He wrote a very important text, Elementary Aspects of Peasant Insurgency in Colonial India. It provided a basis for the study of agrarian economy during the British time. Gayatri Chakraborty also wrote a book named Can the Subaltern Speak? Partha Chatterjee, The Nation and Its Fragments. These are very important texts in order to understand the voice of the downtrodden people. Giving voice to marginalized groups. People are not who until now was not given any importance in the historiography of India gained a voice through the subaltern historiography. It broadened the scope of history. History is not only about a few ruling class of people and few elite people. It influenced the post colonial studies. People came to know about the facts of history which was not at all paid any importance before. So, criticisms of subaltern history. Even though this is very important, it brought forward a few methodological challenges because there is hardly any information available about the subaltern people. People always, historians, scholars, whoever wrote throughout thousands of years, wrote about the ruling elite class. So there was a problem in the methodology. To gain information about the subaltern class is very difficult. The non-elite sources are very difficult to interpret. If you go through the non-elite sources of historiography, there are songs. First of all, there is no proper sources. There are songs, there are poems, there are rumors also, which are very difficult to interpret on the context of history, overlooking the internal diversity and complex social realities. Now, only looking at the subaltern will not give you a proper perspective of Indian history. So, there was an overlooking of different other aspects of Indian history too. Engagement with Marxist approach. Now, subaltern historiography, even though it Marxist historiography, even though it writes about the history of common people, it neglected the subaltern voices. So there was a factor of engagement with the Marxist historians and the subaltern historians, neglecting the influencing factors. Now, you all know that the downtrodden people do not play that much significant role in Indian history as the ruling class, people who are there in the governance. So, only writing the history of downtrodden people won't give you a proper approach to Indian historiography. Now, in conclusion, we will go through all the schools. Conclusion will give you a summary of all the schools that we have learned today. The traditional school of Indian historiography emphasized on religious texts like Vedas, Puranas as historical sources. They depended on divine intervention and mythology. The medieval school of Indian historiography focused on the study of medieval Indian history. They had a chronicle based approach to Indian history. The Orientalist school of historiography was in need of the understanding of Indian culture for the purpose of domination. The Evangelical School was associated with Christian missionaries, and their main intention was to propagate Christianity among the Indian people. The Nationalist School of Historiography emerged as a response to the Orientalist School, and they formed the basis of national movement in India. The Marxist School of Historiography dependent on economic factors as a basis of analysis. The Subaltern School was history of the marginalized groups, people who were not given enough importance. Now, all this school had its unique features, contributions, and criticisms, and all of them played a significant role in the formation of Indian history. Now, even though if you don't agree with some schools, their ideologies, their viewpoints, you cannot disagree to the fact that they contributed a lot for formation of Indian historiography in general, and they're still doing it. Now, thank you for listening to me patiently for this much time. In further next videos, I intend to bring forward different aspects of Indian historiography. I have very limited resources, so hope you like it. Please support me so that I can bring brighter contents in future. Thank you.